Okay, Stephen Lankton. I have this great honor to have you here in my community in Israel. For those who don't know me, I'm Hai Sidman. And the first thing I wanted to do, on your permission, of course, is when you emailed me, I just saw your preview about your introduction, and I got to be honest, a little bit puzzled with all that information. So if you can introduce yourself, because I don't want to have any mistake there.
Oh, well, okay. You have my name, and I'm a psychotherapist here in currently in Arizona. Probably stay in Arizona for the rest of my life, maybe. Um, and uh, my background in the field is that I have a uh, master's degree in social work from the University of Michigan. And I began training in Gestalt therapy and in transactional analysis after, as still as an undergraduate, after 3.5 years, and then eventually 4.5 years of crisis intervention work and training. And um, of course, my graduate work was psychodynamic and behavioral because I went to the University of Michigan. I'll tell you an interesting little anecdote here about it. My first day um, in the training program. So I'm an undergraduate. I don't have any money, and the thing costs a couple $1,000. And the organizer said, "I said I don't know what to do about. I want to come, but I don't have any money." He said, "Well, get a loan, get a loan." So that was my first rush with financing my education without outside of the university, my first loan. And I'm sitting there the first day, and people who had been there the year before when it started were seasoned professionals, already had graduated psychologists, psychiatrists, and master's level social workers. And the organizer said, "Who wants to be the therapist?" And I'm waiting, and nobody volunteered. But I had already had a great deal of experience and really training in Gestalt therapy. And I said, "Well, I will." And also, let's point out that I had read everything that you could read. The good news is that 50, 60 years ago, you could read everything. Nowadays, there's way too much to read.
Mhm.
But so, certainly I had read Pearls and Hefferline and Goodman and Holster and Simpkin and all the Gestalt authors. And this was a Gestalt format. So I sit in the therapist chair, and I said, "Who wants to be the client?" And this woman who was a social worker in Michigan named Kristen, she said, I will." And I said, "Okay." And she came up and sat in the chair, and she said, "You kind of remind me of my brother." And I said, "Oh, okay." So I pulled an empty chair in front of her, and I said, "Put your brother in the empty chair. Tell him you've been thinking of him recently." Now, this part is a little hard to grasp, but I swear it's true. Within 3 or 4 sentences, she was sobbing and talking in another language, and I didn't understand what to do.
Wow.
So she had now age regressed and was doing some kind of talk. It turns out that it was Hungarian, but I don't know Hungarian. So I looked up at the leader with the universal look of, what the heck do I do now? And but trying to keep it subtle. And he said, kind of a test of my knowledge of, I think, of transactional theory. He said, "What's the second rule of communication?" And that's all. That was all. That was his help, which was pretty cool on his part, really. Uh, it was the right thing to do. If you want to stop communication, you don't make a complimentary comment to it. You make one which is a cross transaction, that is my adult to her adult ego state versus my sympathy from my parent to her crying child. That would have kept it going. Cross transaction would have been, and I said, "Well, Kristen, can you tell me, estimate precisely if it's possible, the exact amount of money that you have in currency in your checking account at the moment. So as many big words as I could think about in that kind of a request. And she, what? And I said, as precisely as possible, can you estimate the amount of currency in your checking account? And she's, you, you want me to tell you how much money's in my account? And I said, no, I just wanted to get you into your adult ego state so you could tell me what is happening here in front of us, between us. And it turns out that her brother, when she was 3 or 4 years old, had purposely put her hand on a hot stove to see what would happen, I guess. And that was that little bit of unfinished business that was came through in those first couple of moments when she said, "You look like my brother," was, of course, a little bit of unfinished business from another state of consciousness outside her normal waking state came to the foreground. I made it amplified it with the double chair technique, and she regressed right into it. Of course, I continued to do the therapy, but the point is that happened. Now I go to the University of Michigan the next day to my next class. There's behaviorists on half the student body and psychodynamic, psychoanalytic-ish, ego psychology people on the other half of the student body. And the people who are ego psychologists and psychodynamic are saying, oh, that behavior modification is so stupid, it's so superficial. But yet it was the conditioned response to my big words and my voice tone that pulled her into a different ego state, if you will. Is behavior mod that always, is that criticism right? And then the behavior mod people would say, oh, regression in service of the ego, that's just baloney, that's just role playing, that's just that doesn't happen, that's just misunderstanding of what they see. Well, no, I'm sorry, that actually happens. And I not only, go read, back in those days, go read Gestalt therapy verbatim. There's plenty of examples of it there in that book. But this happened to me. So I'm in a program where I understand the value of both sides, and and really, I don't know that many other people did. Some of the professors did, and they asked me to continue they gave me extra credits for teaching once a month in the cafeteria, teaching what I was learning in Gestalt and
Wow.
transactional analysis. And then that was really my beginning, that then eventually, of course, led me to Gregory Bateson and led me to Erickson. And so let me pause and find out what impact
Yes.
that.
Yeah. To be honest, I didn't do any preparation with the questions. I like to have it more naturalistic and spontaneous as you did right now. It's a beautiful thing for me to do and to have. And I believe in the things that you're saying. Um, I'm interested in your maybe first meeting with Erickson, if I may say like that.
My first contact with him was by telephone in 1975, in July. Uh, I I had just been with Gregory Basin. I'd been at his home in Santa Cruz, and then I had lunch with him. I think we were in Colorado together at the same time, and I had lunch with him there. And I was asking him about something that it seemed reasonable. If you know the work of R.D. Laing, Politics of Experience, Politics of the Family, both of those books mention that the parents are inadvertent. He didn't actually say inadvertent, but that they're hypnotists of the child.
Mhm.
Eric Byrne says in one of his books, I think in What Do You Say After You Say Hello? he says that the parents are inadvertent hypnotists of the children, for the children, to the children, or whatever, and whatever that preposition is. And when you see someone in therapy, at this point I was a graduate and I was a therapist. And when you see people in therapy, you sometimes receive this behavior that's almost like post-hypnotic suggestion, where in post-hypnotic suggestion, you may have the person unable to know, you'll suggest they won't see any books that are read on the bookshelf when they come out of trance. This is stupid, but that's what the experimentalists have done. And then they come out of trance, tell them to go to the bookshelf and pick out that book named something, something. And that's a read book, and they can't see that book. And that post-hypnotic blindness, as it were, negative hallucination, is sort of what you get from some patients when they, if you ask them to look around the room and, someone who can't find anyone that they want to date, and they get all the wrong men, but they look around the room and they don't see anybody but the wrong men. They have like post-hypnotic negative hallucination for all the nice men that they could date. And they just triggered by the behaviors of the others. And so I wonder, to what degree do you think that accurately describes the relationship between parents' communication and children's shape, perception, and socialization? And Bateson talked for a minute about it, and then he said, thinking about it, this is a question that you should ask Milton Erickson. And I thought Erickson was not alive anymore. Actually, that book I read that I mentioned to you that I read way back in high school, it talked about this guy in the desert who was in the autumn of his years. That's how he described him in that book. And everybody else I knew was dead. The Ottoman Empire was dead. The Roman Empire was dead. Socrates was dead. I didn't know that I was reading about a person, especially when he was described as being old already. I had no concept of how long it takes to write a book and get it published and put it in my library. And as far as I knew, these things were 20 years ago that he was talking about. I wasn't exactly a literary scholar back in high school. So I thought he was dead. And I said to Bateson, I wish I'd have met him before he died. And then Bateson had a little bit, I thought he was alive. Oh, this is dreadful news. And then after a couple seconds, he said, no, wait a minute. If he had died, I would have known about it. He's quite alive in Phoenix, Arizona. And there's two Ericksons. Make sure one of them, is a psychiatrist. Make sure you get him. He's probably in the phone book. So I go back to where I lived in Michigan at the time, and I got the information, and we didn't have internet, by the way. And there's a Milton Erickson, MD, and okay, let's try that one. So I call the number, and all I get is hello. And I said, oh, I'm Steve Lankton. I'm calling from Michigan for Milton Erickson. This is he. And as well, I know there are two Milton Ericksons in Phoenix. I'm calling for Milton H. Erickson, the psychiatrist. This is he. Okay. Well, I'm calling because Gregory Bateson said that I should arrange a time to come see you and ask some of my questions directly to you. And he said, write a letter suggesting some dates. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't understand you very well. Write a letter suggesting some dates. And I said, I think we have a bad phone connection because I'm not understanding you very well. The phone is fine. My damn lips are paralyzed. He said, write a letter suggesting some dates, and he hung up. So I wrote a letter suggesting some date and went to see him. Within a couple of months or so, I was in Phoenix. On the way there, the Moody Blues were playing on my radio. This day will last 1,000 years if you wanted to. Seemed apropos. And so I went to see him, and he was too confusing to understand. I had read everything I could. Well, not, no, I had read a great deal about hypnosis. That was the one. I hadn't read everything on hypnosis, but one of the key books by a famous psychiatrist, I don't know if he was a psychiatrist or psychologist. Um, it was a two-volume set, and I won't mention his name because I don't want to
Mhm.
badmouth him, but this was the old days when when hypnosis was traditional, authoritarian. You tell people what to do, and this was a stupid two-volume series. Every chapter was a different kind of medical or psychological problem. The solution, which you could just guess after you got the idea of the first two chapters, was you tell the person you're going to wake up and not have the problem anymore. You're going to like dogs, you're not going to be afraid of dogs, you're blah blah blah, or whatever. It was just like, why did I go to college and learn anything about psychodynamics if that's all you do is just tell them to go to sleep and wake up and not have the problem anymore? This seemed like pretty dumb. And so I wasn't real keen on thinking hypnosis was I didn't fully discount it. I knew people did and said that it was just role playing or compliance or misunderstanding and misperception on the part of the therapist that wrote about it. I knew that, but I mean, still, there are some people for whom this was important in their careers, starting with LeBeau and Bernheim and Charcot and Freud and Jung and Fritz Perls and Karen Horney before him. And all these people had done a little hypnosis. They couldn't all be nuts. I was reading their work, so I wanted to know. And then I couldn't figure out what Erickson was doing. It was nothing like what I had read in that book. Uh, I did ask him the question, and I asked him asked him on my first day when he would ask you what you were there for, and on my next visit, and I was there 5 or 6 days. I had sometimes overlapped the weekends, so I could stay longer. And every 3 months, I went like clockwork because I had at that job that I had at Family Services in Jackson, Michigan. I had four 5-day vacations and one 3-day conference and one 5-day conference. Pretty liberal. Of course, I didn't pay anything, so they paid you very little back in those days. But so I could take a 5-day and 2 weekend days every 3 months and even have time left over for a conference to get my continuing education credits.
Mhm.
That was very convenient. I would just go like clockwork. And it would take me about a month and a half or two before my sense of what I'd learned was fading. And it was time to kind of go back and get another infusion of this personality that I was experiencing. Um, and what I wanted to do was understand. I didn't want to be him. I didn't want to. I just my goal ever since I was an engineering major was to figure out how things work. And hi, I got to tell you the little tangent here to prove my point. The one phrase my mother said most often, probably other than Steve, don't, which we all, heard it forever, was don't take it apart in the car. You're going to lose a piece. Because every time we'd go somewhere and I'd buy, you know, headphones or whatever it was, little cars, you couldn't get these back then. I would open them up and I would be taking the tops off and seeing how the bottom came out and finding out how they worked and where the springs were and what the levers did. And that was just, I was more interested in that than I was playing with the dumb thing over and over redundantly. I wanted to know how they worked. And so that was, I mean, really, that just has been apparently my life script and driving force for pretty much everything. And I'm, I mean, and I can fix anything. So, I can't fix automobiles anymore since they went and got all computerized and stuff. I didn't have the tools to figure out what went to what anymore, and information became proprietary and you couldn't really, even if you could figure out what the computer was connected to, you didn't know what the schematic was. So anyway, I wanted to find out how Erickson worked, and I couldn't figure it out. He would say things like, so on my third visit, I held up four fingers. On my third visit, uh, I asked him the same question that I'd asked Bateson, and he said, every time you come here, you ask the same thing. If you want to see me, you're going to have to do something different. My students have seen the boojum tree. Do you know a boojum tree? And I said, no, I don't know that. What's the word? Boojum, B-double-O-B-U-J, B-double-O-G. No, it's B-O-G. Wait a minute. And he misspelled it several times before he decided on the proper spelling.
Hmm.
I was interested in everything. I knew all the trees in North America, and I had never heard of a boojum tree. Well, it's a cactus, is it? It's not a tree. So that's why maybe. But anyway, he said, one of the things he said, it's a real tree. Lewis Carroll wrote about it. Well, if Lewis Carroll wrote about a rabbit with an alarm clock, that's hardly that's not a scholarly reference. I'm sorry. And he said it's a real tree, and it grows north. You can see it in the botanical gardens, or you can see it north of Squaw Peak. Well, actually, west of Squaw Peak, as it turns out. And some of my students have walked around there, and they've seen one. So go there and look for it. And when you find it, your unconscious will know it's a tree, and your conscious mind will say, "I don't believe it." And so go into a trance the way I showed you, and then your unconscious, or then your conscious mind will know that it's a tree, and your unconscious will say, I don't believe it, I don't believe it, I don't believe it, I just don't believe it. So I thought, okay, well, whatever. And then he turned his chair, and you get a cold shoulder, and it's really clear you're not included in the group anymore from the way he was addressing the others. So I left, and I got my tennis shoes on from the hotel room, and I went to Squaw Peak, which is now, you can see it from my window here, and walked around the desert, wondering what in the world this could possibly be. And he spelled it Boojum of different ways. And at this, I already knew Erickson had read the entire unabridged dictionary by the time he was through third grade. So he knew how to spell words. So I'm thinking he misspelled this on purpose for some reason. And I'm rearranging the letters. You get, like boo, like, a ghost would say boo. And you get jumbo, and you get bum. And and I'm thinking, yeah, my dad said I'd be a big bum if I, didn't go to college. And maybe that's what he's talking about. And I don't know what. And all of a sudden, here's this upside down carrot. And I said, oh my God, that's a tree. And then I don't believe it. And then I remembered him saying, go into trance and look at it. So now you go into trance and look at it. And that's basically an awareness that you're standing in the dirt in the sunlight looking at a plant.
Wow.
About as exciting as that moment is. I'm waiting for the Star Wars. Oh, I forgot to tell you one other thing before I get to this part of the story. Before he stopped talking to me about this, he said, go to the north of Squaw Peak, and when you see it, blah, 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 and you'll say it. And then he said, and then look for the creeping devils. They'll be there. And then he turned away from me. So the idea of creeping devils also put a little scary part to it, which was one of the things that fed my idea of the word boo being scary. And so I was thinking, I don't want to be a bum. That's scary, and I couldn't figure out. And I thought of all the things I'd scared myself away from, like not going to medical school and not dating Sally Sweet, who was in the class because I was afraid she'd turn me down. And there's this tree, and I'm saying, I don't believe. So I look at it, and then I'm thinking, well, okay, so yes, I'm saying I don't believe it. I don't believe he knew I'd say I don't believe it. That I don't believe it. Was this just a joke? I can't believe that. And then, creeping devils. And I waited for some moment, and then, I'm still just standing there looking at things without many thoughts in my head. And there's a bunch of cactuses, with like about this big around with thorns on them, horizontally growing on the ground like a net. And I thought, well, there you go. That must be the creeping devils. I was stunned and looking at this, and I realized that the cactuses at the base of the Boojum tree would reasonably be named creeping devils because they were creeping cactuses. And if you hit one with your shoe or foot, the word devil would come to mind, as a blaming the thing on bad luck. And so I saw the creeping devils, and I still didn't. I still was standing there thinking, God, I don't believe. What was the point? Was this for fun? Was this? I can't believe you do that. Was this learning? But I don't know what I learned. I don't. I can't. So anyway, I go back to his place, puzzled,
Mm-hmm.
and I sit down, and I had still now I had my tennis shoes, so I hadn't put my suit clothes back on yet, and he looks at me, looks at my shoes, looks at my hands, gets up to my face, and he leans forward and he says, "So, you've seen the Boojum tree?" And I guess so, yeah. And did you see the creeping devils? And he just holds this stare. And I'm sitting there being held in a stare and politely not looking away. I'm like, yeah, I got to answer the question. Did I see the creeping devils? Uh, I think so. But then meanwhile, in those few seconds or I don't know how long it was, 20 seconds maybe, I'm thinking of everything that happened that I was thinking of. The high school, the track team, the medical school, and everything, my dad and everything is going through my mind. Uh, Maybe that was the creeping devils. I'm not sure what he meant. And finally, he breaks the gaze and he says, "Remember that. There'll always be creeping devils. And now I want to teach you something else." Wait a minute, what? And now to process that many years later, this has come to mind during a couple of interesting events from time to time. Uh, when I was at a holy site once, I I all of a sudden felt like my feet weren't touching the ground, and I looked down real quick to see if I was about to fall or something, and I said, "Wow, I don't believe it." And then I remembered this whole thing, and my learning. I mean, if I say I don't believe it, I'm discounting my experience, and that's a dumb thing to do. It was my experience. I do believe I'm having this experience, right? And so situations like that would trigger it until I stopped forever saying I don't believe it anymore. And um and there were like other times that it would come to mind, and I realized why. So as time went on, I was decoding Dr. Erickson's work. This was before we had people like Zeig and I and Gilligan and others saying that here's some, and Rossi saying, here's indirect suggestions, here's some examples of binds, here's examples of anecdotes and metaphors. And even though Erickson had written about these things, we hadn't read all of them. I didn't have access to the American Journal of Clinical Hypnosis, so I couldn't even read all those. Uh, and then so before we had words to figure it out, we really had a chaos of stuff that we tried to uh, determine what was an antecedent and what was a consequence of the communication and uh, transaction between us. I now realize that regarding anecdotes and metaphors, that if you want to make something last a long time in the listener's mind, you make a very compelling delivery and enough to actually motivate them to action, perhaps, and you make it very ambiguous. And if it's not too ambiguous that it seems that it came from, Scientology or something. If you make it just believably ambiguous and you make it really compelling delivery of it,
Mhm.
there's compelling in the sense that there's something to learn here, then that will stick with the listener for a long time. And those are the two variables on that. In the meanwhile, I have, just written formulas for indirect suggestions and binds, that 10 of them that I think are the most useful and common. I've uh, described his structure of metaphor and metaphors that have actual predictability to retrieve a cognitive attitude, or to retrieve an emotion or a sensation of some kind. Formulas for metaphors, and I've mapped out his multiple embedded metaphor structure, and ambiguous function assignments, which that Boojum tree was, for extramural activities, and written about the importance of those transactions and paradox, and hypnosis induction for that matter. And in studying him, I realized that Erickson has changed from 1929, when he graduated and was doing hypnosis, to 1959, when he began, in 58, when he began publishing about uh, naturalistic induction and utilization. And so he went from being an authoritarian, telling people to go to sleep redundantly, and if you see the early 1940 videos and 1950 videos, uh, there's one where he's working with a subject in front of others, and she's going to go for a hospital operation she's nervous about. And he flat out tells her, you can be comfortable doing something you didn't understand. You can have that comfort in the hospital during an operation, can't you? And she nods her head. What's she going to do? Say, no, I don't think I can. That's why I'm here. But anyway, and he uses sleep and sleepy and go deeper. I think it was 39 times, or in that one little episode. It's like very redundant.
Mhm.
And he went from that to, like, the story of the guy with the florist who uh, had radical surgery on his face. And Erickson just talked about a tomato plant growing comfortably and doesn't know how it brings peace and comfort with roots that you can't see and you can't hear. And he doesn't talk anything about human beings sleeping or complying to him. It's a very egalitarian and indirect approach. And that typified his later work from 1960 until 1980, March, when he died. And um, and by the way, some of these stories were pretty bizarre, like that one. I was teaching Erickson's work in Ohio to a bunch of to a psychiatric Ohio psychiatric group. I don't know what they call themselves,
Institute.
and uh, and one of the guys in the back said, "This is absolutely true. I was there." Oh, the middle of the story is that wait, that's a different story. I almost got confused. I've got two stories that are bizarre. The other one was the nurse that disappeared after being his demonstration subject in Boston, and Leo Alexander was the head of the hospital, and 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 this woman didn't come back after he brought her up on stage. He said, "Now's the right time," and he had told her that she'd be on, she'd know the right time when he met her and gave her permission to be the subject. And then he used induction language during his lecture. She went into a trance, and he said, "Now's the right time." She stood up and walked up on stage, and he worked with her. And then she didn't come back to work, and everyone thought she had committed suicide because she was
Wow.
depressed. And and he tells this story in such a interesting way, and then on Friday, still no word from Jan, and that was a payday. So everyone started talking, but then the next week, still nothing. And another week passed with nothing, and then another, and now a whole month had passed until finally, still nothing had been heard from her. And then a month turned into 2 months and turned into 6 months, and then all of a sudden, nothing still happened. And he dragged this on for 16 years
Wow.
until she called him up on the phone and said, "Do you remember me? And my name's Janice. You worked with me." And he said, in Boston. And he said, "Oh, Janice, of course I remember you. How nice to hear that. How nice to hear about your living, And so then they reconnected, and he assured her that she'd be a good candidate for going back to graduate school, which was in her mind important to talk to him because he had her do automatic writing and she felt stupid before that, I guess. I don't know. But anyway,
Wow.
I run into this. I moved to Pensacola, Florida, and I'm telling this to a group of professionals there. She's the head of psychiatric nursing at um, Baptist Hospital there in Pensacola. And she's getting, this woman's kind of nodding off when I do Milton's accent. And I said, "Are you okay?" And she said, "Yeah, I knew Milton. I worked with him. I was a subject once." And I said, "Oh, where?" And she said, "I worked with him in Boston, Boston State Hospital." And I said, "Well, he told me he was never invited back after he worked with the demonstration subject with Leo Alexander." And she said, "Yeah, I was the subject." I
Wow.
said, "What? You disappeared for 16 years?" Oh, she said, "I didn't disappear. I just left town." And she came to Pensacola, married a naval officer, went back to college there at the University of West Florida, and became, I think, a PhD nurse at this time. And now she was the head of psychiatric nursing. And I watched her work with a client a couple of days after that. I went to see her at work, and she kind of had a Milton Erickson ego state at this point. The person she was telling that he came out of surgery and that he was going to be relaxing sooner or later, he'd figure out how to relax really deeply, and it might come to him automatically, and then he'd suddenly realize he was relaxing, or he might purposely try to relax, and then eventually it would come to him and it would be automatic, and it might be from his head to his feet, or his feet to his head, or even from the inside out, or none of those things. And I'm thinking, holy crap, this woman knows indirect suggestion better than most of my students do.
Mhm.
That was pretty interesting. But anyway, that's one unbelievable story. The other one was the face surgery from the tomato plant.
Mhm.
And then I got overlapping neurons here and I missed it. I went to the other story. And so I'm teaching in Garmisch-Peckingham in the southwest Germany, and I share a taxi back with another presenter who's an anthropologist. And we're going up to Munich airport. And she wants to know what I do. And I said, "Well, I'm a psychotherapist. I don't usually say hypnosis." And, "Well, what kind?" And I said, "Oh, well, primarily I do, I've done Gestalt and TA, and I use hypnosis. I've written some books on hypnosis." "Oh, I know something about hypnosis. We had this, my father died of this, was a florist, and he had really bad cancer in his face, and he had face surgery, and he was in horrible pain. So we called the psychiatrist to come in, and we didn't tell my dad he was a hypnotist. And the guy came in and he was talking to my dad. And at one point, I didn't know. I went in with a piece of paper saying, 'When are you going to use hypnosis?' And my dad didn't even see me. And I realized he was already in trance.
Mm.
And this is the story Erickson tells. She came in with a piece of paper saying, 'When are you going to put him in use hypnosis?' And she realized he was somnambulistic and she left. And so here's corroboration on the other side of the globe of another one of his hard to accept stories, and hard to accept just because the question is, was he just telling you this for effect? Did he confabulate this, or was this actually what happened? And these are among the two most bizarre stories that he told, and I have corroboration that they were absolutely true for him. So anyway,
This is very fascinating. Wow. I can do
so
that
I tried
for.
to unpack all of those interventions and things, and I want to say before our time runs out
Mm.
that he didn't have a model of personality, but he had a model in the sense that there are things in the front of your mind and things that aren't. And so I would like to say that each of those things that aren't belong to other states of consciousness. They're not just pebbles rolling through a river. There's an interconnected neural network, like the woman in the first story I told you, where the thought of her brother was enough of a trigger to another unfinished business in a state of consciousness she doesn't usually get to. Our normal waking state has a pretty solid boundary around it that's semi-permeable. That is, other experiences can come in, and like with her, and they don't have to be traumatic, though. And like all of a sudden, I can tell you a song and you'll start remembering it, even though it wasn't part of your normal waking state. It just pulls from childhood or earlier memories where that song was a part of the package of neural fabric of things. So what we do with hypnosis that's not authoritarian is you establish rapport, and as you do that, it becomes difficult to tell which person has really begun the idea. You know, if I say, well, that's just like the time that you probably had some experiences like, oh yeah, I had this experience. Now, something he did stimulated me to say it. My saying it stimulated him to have it. It's not clear who started that process.
Mhm.
Uh, like our discussion earlier on about the dream. And so it begins to break down the boundary between I'm here and something's different over there. And as the difference dissolves, the boundary between the ego boundary, if you want to use that word, or the identity subsystem, if you want to just use another word that means the same thing, begins to break down or get more, not break down, but get more permeable. And if I'm being ambiguous and you're trying to put personal meaning to it, you're searching over into other ego states that have that possible goodness of fit. And in linguistics, it's a search for meaning across different uh, frameworks. So it's a transderivational search, different meaning search.
Mhm.
And you're looking for the one that fits the best. And when you find the goodness of fit, crossing the sensory strip, there'll be a peak voltage for those experiences, and the neural net will stop the frequency of undulating so much. So you think you've learned, you think you've got it. Basically, in other words, across your sensory strip, your cortex is now informed. Oh, I kind of know what he means. I've had that experience. So you're using ambiguous sentences while you've got this rapport. The person is searching for what you mean in other ego states. And as you pull together dissociation and relaxation and confidence and comfort, and now you're talking about those cyclically, those neurons begin to fire together and they begin to wire together. And so you now have established temporarily a state in which outside perception has been reduced, inside search has been increased. I'm relaxed, I'm confident. You've got hypnosis. And if you can label it and get the person to reflect upon how those boundaries are, then they can probably get them back with self-hypnosis a little easier in the future. But now you've got a state that's not very permanent. And so it's still easy to search for other experiences. And Erickson's idea of a cure should be a little better known. It is having the experiences you need in the context where they're required. So if you're having a bug phobia, then I need to have you pull out the experience of comfort and safety and that you're not going to be harmed and so on, and then have you think about this situation of maybe bugs. But you don't have to do it like with blatant words like that. You can reference, people on camping trips who are looking at the ground and looking at the animals and looking at the trees, and they see small creatures crawling among the leaves. Now I've got you there to look at bugs, but I didn't have to say, now think about bugs.
Yes.
And so the indirection causes you to pick your own example. Where was I that's similar to looking at the foliage and looking at the leaves? Oh, yeah, I remember. And I'm thinking of that while I'm also feeling the fact that I won't be harmed and the fact that I'm safe and confident. So I'm rewiring, I'm pulling the resources needed into the context. Where did I get them? I got them from other states of consciousness where they exist. How did I do it? I used rapport to make sure that the boundaries of the temporary state we created uh, allow you to feel safe and comfortable, and also are semi-permeable enough that you can easily go and pick out another experience. Traditional hypnosis research calls that the trait of suggestibility. And I say, no, no, it's not a trait of suggestibility. It's how well the communication and context set up a transderivational search. And some people are easier to set that up with than others because the rapport that you can have is easier with some people than it is with others. And and that assembling of hypnosis is not a trait of hypnotizability. It's the same thing I just explained. How well can the communication and context retrieve those bits and pieces with that client? And that has to do with that client's, personal history and sense of allowing rapport to occur, for one thing, and your ability to hit the rapport with them, maybe by being a universally nice human being, or maybe by having the same job history in your background or something. But nevertheless, that's the sequence, I think. And Erickson's communication style was to present that ambiguity in a controlled fashion to help the person personalize the experience they're pulling out from other experiences and hooking together.
Well,
How's that for a mouthful?
wow. Now, first of all, you explained it and described it as an engineer, but as a genius one. That was brilliant. No, it's true. Wow. Wow.
Well,
I'm
and
fascinated.
and also pretty researchable. I mean, none of those parts are, I mean, did I don't know. It's hard to research whether your personal memory is anything like the words that were suggested, but it makes such um, universally understandable sense that it's maybe you can't research it. I can't research whether you and I both have the same color red in our head when I say picture a red circle. So how do we figure that out? Even functional MRIs aren't going to say, you fired off this bit and I fired off that bit, and they were kind of similar bits. Maybe that's it. I don't know. We don't know. We need far better instrumentation if we're going to try to use Newtonian physics and methodology from Descartes and Bacon and Newton. If we're going to use that kind of science uh, to and let's not forget Aristotle. If we're going to use that kind of science to stand back and think we're investigating something that we're not influencing, and being able to reify and say there's an antecedent and here's a response, because things aren't happening that way when they're alive and when they're at quantum levels and so the scientific paradigm we keep forcing psychologists to use applies to a limited range of the world that we can experience. And that's good. That gets us pencils and that gets us computer chips, but it doesn't explain how plants talk to each other. Oh, maybe there's pheromones. Okay, how do the pheromones know to be those pheromones? Well, we don't know that. There's always that, and not only that, you don't have an electron until you break down the wave particle by investigating, see if there's an electron there. Clearly, the act of consciousness and awareness, let's say awareness, the act of awareness changes things at the quantum level. How are you going to standardize that? Two therapists don't hypnotize people the same way. The hypnosis they get is not the same hypnosis. Your relaxation and my relaxation, my confidence, your confidence, your security, my security, they're different proprioceptive experiences and different neurons holding them together. And so you can take a shot at trying to apply the scientific method to this. And of course, you want to do that if possible. But there's so many variables that it seems to come down more to a craft almost, or an art, than it does a science. And so I think most people don't understand Erickson's work because it's not uh, part of the way they learn to think about psychology, with big words like id and superego And like even when you say ego support, what the hell do you mean by ego support? Well, I know what I mean by ego support, and I think it's what they mean too. They just don't explain it very well. If I can make sure that my current state of consciousness is able to pull into the foreground the experiences I need in this context, and I've helped you get that, I've helped you get confidence around bugs, that's ego supportive. And it helps me maintain my state of consciousness rather than break it down like an intrusive thought of my brother putting my hand on a stove. You know?
So basically, you are describing here a strategy for review, how to view things. This is the strategy of investigating things and not just maybe look at them as they are.
Yeah, that's the hard part to get your bias out of the way.
I also
And part of the bias is our learned language. So there's also a
Mhm.
global problem of language differences here and there.
I also think that when you described before that, I think it's the playground of the consciousness of us, and we're pulling the information from there. But not everybody interpreted it so open-ended.
Yeah, and there's quite a diversity of understanding people. I mean, there's certainly people that think that when I'm speaking to them, I'm speaking to Krishna through them, and that kind of messes up my model a little bit because they're not dicing up the universe in the same way I am.
Yes. Well,
Do you have
one
any questions that I've managed to stimulate that
actually I have
try
a
to be
lot.
short in my answers?
Yeah, I have a lot of questions, but I think it will be there for another episode if you on your permission. I just wanted to ask you one last thing. If you have any message here for my community in Israel,
Regarding what topic?
everything that comes on your head. And I think that
Any
you're,
post
as a thinker, you had a lot of there.
Well, I have many thoughts, but I think you have a community of of psychotherapists. You have a community of psychoanalysts and psychotherapists who really are well read and well disciplined. And so I hope that in any kind of stimulation from the thing I'm talking about, um, that the people who want to investigate this turn to Erickson's actual writings and especially recognize there's a difference before and after 1959, 1960. And of course, we were looking at that later work because that's what he evolved into and decided was better. Now I know that in some cases that doesn't always work out that way. Like the Jefferson Airplane first album was really better than some of those later albums by Jefferson Starship.
Mm,
And sorry if you don't understand that reference, but and certainly the first Jurassic Park was better than the fourth one, and the first Alien movie was better than the third one. But uh, but the first part of Erickson is not better than the last part of Erickson. Erickson's work in those last few years combined what he already knew about psychotherapy and put it into what he needed to know about induction. So his induction and his psychotherapy both use those same principles I just spoke about in with the states of consciousness.
mhm,
And of course, it's also important to remember that what he did before research wise and anecdotally with people was the therapy was still the same. And so you do probably want to look into that because you're going to see all those uncommon cases and how they were solved once the hypnosis was established. So there's that. And then as far as the political state goes, I sure hope that this whole situation is over with. The attack that you all received at that music concert was just barbaric and and I wouldn't think Genghis Khan would have done anything
Yeah.
other than that. And we're a long way from, or I don't even know if Genghis Khan was that bad, but Alexander the Great or somebody. I mean, some of these people were pretty ruthless rulers, and that's just got to go away. We're a civilized world now, and it's time to act that way.
Yes, I think that the technology goes smarter and smarter, but humans beings kind of maybe
Dumber and
got
dumber.
got lost. Yeah.
There's something we lose. We lose a gut feeling. You watch television and see a televangelist asking for money, and my gut feeling from where I grew up in the outside of a capital city in the rural area, my parents weren't fooled by that kind of baloney. My gut says that guy's lying to me. That guy's just a liar. Who in the hell would send him money? He's not believable at all. He's just, hello, don't you have intuition anymore? What happened? And we're misled by leaders like this all the time. And uh, okay, maybe Young is right. We're looking, there's an archetype emerging for a leader, and we're all going for it, and we don't know what we're. But let's
Yes.
get a good one.
It
Let's get
feels.
one with that you use your gut feeling to think that, and then there's civilization. Let's not forget about politeness and courtesy and all the things our religions presumably told us, in the Judeo-Christian religions at least.
Mhm.
We don't murder people that don't believe our way. We feed them and uh, we love them like ourselves. So
Speaking of engineering, I think it's a human engineering here in a certain way. So we need to be more smart in the
yeah.
future.
Yeah, our education system in the United States has really slipped. People don't, I don't think people understand, for example, a lot of people don't understand, for example, the three-part government system that provides checks and balances. For example, I doubt that people, I imagine there are many, 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 many people you could ask if I said how many official parts of the government, they wouldn't know three, and I'd say why, and they wouldn't know checks and balances. Certainly nobody's read John Stuart Mill in a long time, apparently, about egalitarian uh, conduct in a system where like do like Spock did.
Yeah.
The life of the one is against the life of the many, so the
Okay.
survival of the one.
Uh,
But yes, and our education system is slipping, and it's slipping in a lot of places worldwide, except for perhaps in tech and engineering in some countries where they really uh, taught their children how to learn, and be concentrated and not, you know, not try to be influencers and rock stars.
mhm. Yes.
Yeah, well, I digress, but
Yeah. Steve Lankton, that was I don't know how to describe it in words. That was a very fascinating, hypnotic, naturalistic, charming meeting with you. Uh, you are a genius yourself, and I appreciate it a lot and your opportunity that you gave me. And I wishing all the best for you.
well, same here for you. Hi, and I hope that you and the psychology and Ericksonian community there really uh, carry the ball forward, because in a few years there won't be any Jeff Seigs and Steve Langtons and Steve Gilligan's around anymore. And Erickson's work is already being said to be 73% of people that were polled worldwide said they were Ericksonian. Well, I don't see that in the journal articles that I get with the American Journal of Clinical Hypnosis. Some people saying they used an Ericksonian approach, and just because they tried to help a person cope with his current environment. I go, what? That's every therapy does that. That's not particularly Ericksonian, for crying
Yeah.
out loud. And so needs to be people that get it and continue it, because his not to be Erickson, but because his contributions improve the way we understand people, their needs, and how to help them change and become better. That's all. So good night to you, or
Yeah.
good afternoon, if late night over there, I think,
Yes,
and
at night.
hopefully we talk again one day.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. All the best.
You too.